Hello, this is Music Tech Explained, the visual approach. Apple just released the Logic Pro for Mac update 10.8. So keep on watching and I will tell you all about it. Welcome to Music Tech Explained, the visual approach. My name is Edgar Rothermage, author of the best-selling book series Graphically Enhanced Manuals. In this video, I will show the new features and changes in the Logic Pro for Mac update 10.8, like the mastering assistant, recording in 32-bit float, the new concept of default region types, enhanced support for MIDI 2.0 and more. But before we get started, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell button to get notified about exciting new videos in my Music Tech Explained YouTube channel. For more detailed explanations of all the new features and changes in this new release, please check out my new book, Logic Pro What's New in 10.8. Let's start with the brand new Mastering Assistant plugin that is now available in Logic Pro for Mac and Logic Pro for iPad. The 10.8 update also added the Beat Breaker and Sample Alchemy plugin that were already introduced in Logic Pro for iPad. By the way, if you haven't checked out Logic Pro for iPad, download the free trial from the App Store to experience the all-new creative interface made for touch. Also, click the link below to watch my introduction video I released in my YouTube channel earlier this year. Back to the new Mastering Assistant plugin. As the name implies, with this plugin, you can add the finishing mastering touches to your final mix to get it ready for release. Mastering Assistant is a special plugin in the way how it is loaded. On the insert slots on the stereo output channel strip, there is now a dedicated mastering button that loads the plugin when you click on it. You can also load the plugin from the Mix menu in the main menu bar or use the corresponding key command. The plugin is loaded after the last used effect slot, but can be moved to a different position as any other plugins. Now let's look at the workflow on how to use the plugin. It involves the following steps. The first step is to finish your mix, so don't load the Mastering Assistant plugin until you are ready to add the final mastering touches to it. Now when you're ready, you load the plugin, which automatically triggers a process where Mastering Assistant analyzes your mix, the signal of the stereo output channel strip, to be specific. You will see a progress dialog during the analysis. Once the analysis is completed, Mastering Assistant makes the following corrections, if necessary. It applies a frequency curve to optimize the frequency response of your mix. You can see that frequency curve in the plugin. It adjusts the stereo width by narrowing or widening it. You see that on the width knob. It adjusts the loudness of your mix using compression and limiting to reach an integrated loudness level of about -14 LUFS, which stands for Loudness Units Full Scale. -14 LUFS is a distribution loudness used by most streaming services. Mastering Assistant also caps the signal level to -1 dB true peak, also part of the delivery specs of most streaming services. Technically, you are ready to bounce your song, assuming that you like all the adjustments that the Mastering Assistant plugin applied. However, the plugin provides various controls that let you adjust the automatic corrections. By moving the Auto EQ slider up or down, you can increase or decrease the amount of the analyzed frequency curve. As you can see on the graph, you are not just shifting the curve up or down, you are only increasing or decreasing the affected frequency bands. The center, which is the 100% mark, represents the default curve, and dragging it down to 0% turns the EQ correction off. In addition to the analyzed frequency curve, you can overlay a custom frequency curve by dragging the 3 blue handles or their corresponding fields below. The blue dotted lines show the frequency curve for each handle. The Custom EQ button lets you toggle that frequency curve on or off. And of course, you can option click on the handle or the field to reset them. Also, when you play back your song, you see a 80-band spectrum analyzer in the EQ section in the form of 80 vertical bars. The Excite button is a simple on-off button to add harmonic distortion, additional overtones. The Spread knob lets you widen or narrowing the stereo width of your mix. Watch the correlation meter next to it to make sure you are not overdoing it and end up with out-of-phase signals. Dialing the knob all the way to the left folds your mix down to mono. The Loudness knob affects the loudness of your mix. However, it doesn't have a dedicated scale where you select a specific LUFS value. The center position represents the default loudness level of about -14 LUFS that Logic automatically achieves based on the initial analysis by using various compressors and limiter plugins under the hood. By turning the knob to the right, you increase the loudness, for example, to -9 LUFS, or turn the knob to the left to reduce the loudness, for example, to -20 LUFS. Here's a little advice. Keep in mind that your main objective when mixing and mastering your song should be how good does your mix sound, and not how loud it is. First of all, increasing the loudness will reduce the dynamic of your song and also often introduces distortion and pumping effects, depending on the source material. At the end, when played back on streaming services, an overly loud mix, let's say at -6 LUFS, has its level turned down by 10 dB when played back on Apple Music due to the implementation of Loudness Normalization. So that loud, squashed song sounds as loud as a good sounding mix without distortion and a healthy dynamic, mastered at -14 LUFS. However, if a loudness level of -6 LUFS gets you the sound of what you want in your mix, go ahead. Just be aware of the consequences. There is one more adjustable control in the Mastering Assistant, and that is the character pop-up menu in the upper left corner. You can choose from 4 options, transparent being the default one. Think about this the following way. Mastering Assistant is using various compressor and limiter plugins to achieve a specific loudness, but as you know from Logic's compressor plugin, you can set the controls at a specific way and choose different compressor models that could significantly change the sound characteristics. And that is what's happening when you choose different character options in the Mastering Assistant. Logic is using different compressor and limiter plugins based on various algorithms that change the sound of your mastered mix. Try to find which sound you like best for your song. Keep in mind that these models are only available on Macs with Apple Silicon due to the high processing demands of the plugin. While applying the manual adjustments, you can watch various meters available in the Mastering Assistant plugin. On top is the True Peak meter, showing the signal level as dBFS True Peak. The field on the right is a numeric peak hold that you click to reset. Below you have the 3 standard loudness meters with the absolute LUFS scale. M for momentary loudness, S for short-term loudness, and I for the important integrated loudness. In addition, you have the LU range field, or loudness range. Pay attention to the 2 buttons below the meters that affect only the integrated loudness and the LU range meters. Unlike conventional meters that display the current signal, these 2 meters act like an average meter that measures the signal and applies a calculation that takes into account all signal levels of the entire program you measure. You click the Start button to start measuring and calculating. The button now changes to a Pause button. Clicking the Pause button stops the measurement, but keeps the calculated value that it is measured so far, so you can continue anytime. That allows you to measure segments of your song. The Reset button clears both values. I posted a tutorial a while ago on my logicprogem.com website that provides more information about the important loudness normalization topic. Please find the link below. The correlation meter functions the same as Logic's correlation meter plugin. The Mastering Assistant plugin has two buttons that let you do an A/B comparison of your mix with and without the processing applied by Mastering Assistant. You click the bypass button to toggle between them. However, to do a sound comparison between two mixes, you need to level match them, so both versions sound equally loud, or you will always favor the louder mix as the better sounding mix. For that, you have the Loudness Compensation button. When you enable it, Logic will reduce the signal level of the processed signal to match it to the loudness of the unprocessed signal. Now you can toggle the bypass button to compare both mixes. Be careful and make sure to turn off both buttons before you bounce your mix. There is one more button labeled Reanalyze. Usually, the analysis is done on the final mix when you insert the Mastering Assistant plugin, so you can work on the improvements of your mix. In case you decide to tweak your mix after the analysis, then you might consider reanalyzing the mix to see if Mastering Assistant has some additional tweaks. Those changes due to reanalyzing the mix will not affect your manual adjustments like custom EQ, loudness, or the Excite button, with the exception of the width control. By the way, when you enable the cycle range in Logic, then the analysis is only performed on that section of your song. In that case, the button says Reanalyze Section. And finally, here is a diagram I drew to show the functionality of the Mastering Assistant with the different components and controls. Input on the left and the output on the right. The analysis of the input signal and the processing that is applied based on that analysis. Then you have the manual controls that lets you adjust the various components, the EQ, the loudness, the stereo width, and the harmonic distortion. The output is kept at a -1 dB true peak ceiling. Pay attention to the location of the two switches, the bypass and loudness compensation. While the bypass button switches between the input and output of the processor, the loudness compensation button adjusts the output level of the processor to match the input signal. The meter section is straightforward with the special start, pause, reset buttons that only affect the integrated loudness and the LU range. Hope that helps with the understanding of this great Mastering Assistant plugin in Logic Pro 10.8. Now let's look at the new concept in Logic Pro, the default region type. If you use Logic Pro for iPad, then you might have seen that parameter already. I want to have a closer look at it because it affects multiple areas in Logic that can be easily overlooked. The best way to understand the concept of the default region type is to look at 4 areas in Logic that are related or affected by the new default region type concept: the new tracks dialog, the track inspector, the regions on the track lanes, and the various editors. Let's start with the new tracks dialog. You open it with any of 3 methods. By clicking the Add Tracks button above the track headers, choose the New Tracks command from the track menu, or just use the key command Option Command N. Once the New Tracks dialog opens, you will notice already that it looks a little bit different. This is not just a cosmetic difference, and you have to be aware of the implications of those changes. Here's how the new tracks dialog looked like in 10.7.9. Or it looked like that, because there was a checkbox in the general display settings that lets you choose if you want to show the icons or not. Now in Logic Pro 10.8, there's only one view with icons, at least smaller ones. Here are the details. The title of the window has changed from Choose a Track Type to Create New Track. You will understand the reason for that in a moment. In 10.7.9, you could choose from 3 track types: an audio track, a software instrument track, or a trauma track. Spoiler alert, the dedicated trauma track doesn't exist anymore in 10.8. Now when you look at the new tracks dialog in 10.8, you see 4 big tiles, and you might think that there are now 4 track types, but that's not the case. The 4 tiles represent 4 region types, and that is what you select here. In this diagram, I drew the same 4 icons and their position to explain what happens when you select those icons to create a track. The most important fact to understand is that the 4 icons represent 4 region types, not track types. The track type that you create in the New Tracks dialog depend on what region type you select. The section on the right represents the audio track, which is a track that processes audio data. When you select or double-click the blue audio icon, you create a new audio track that is assigned to an audio channel strip. Any of the first 3 icons on the left creates a software instrument track or an external MIDI track. There is some overlap, or should I say some potential confusion, that I explain in my new book. So here's the important new concept. A software instrument track in Logic now has a new parameter called the default region type. And by selecting one of these 3 icons, MIDI, pattern, or drummer, you set the default region type to MIDI, pattern, or drummer for the software instrument track that you are creating. But what is the purpose of those default region types? I will explain that in a moment. First, let's look at the second area that has to do with the default region type, and that is the track inspector. Here's the project with the New Tracks dialog open. When I select the MIDI tile and click Create, or double-click the MIDI icon, I will create a software instrument track with its default region type set to MIDI. Here is the new software instrument track in the Tracks area. And when I look at the track inspector, I see the new parameter default region type. It is a pop-up menu, and when I click on it, it shows 3 options in the menu: MIDI, pattern, drummer. So that is takeaway number 2. Regardless of what region type I select in the New Tracks dialog, MIDI, pattern, or drummer, I can change it later at any time for that software instrument track. Now that we know how to select and how to change the default region type for a software instrument track, what is the actual purpose for that? It sets the default color of the track. That means the color bar on the track and channel strip, and also the color of the track icon if you use one of the monochrome icons. So MIDI is green, pattern is violet, and drummer is yellow. Here is another convenience. When creating a new region on the track lane using the pencil tool or the force touch gesture, Logic creates the region type depending on the default region type setting of that track. Another thing that has changed related to the default region type is the editor's pane. Now when you select a software instrument track in your project and no region is selected, then the editor's pane shows the tab for all editors: the piano roll, score, step sequencer, and drummer. The tab that is highlighted depends on the default region type and the selected software instrument track. Keep in mind that when you select a region, then only the corresponding editor will be displayed in the editor's pane. For the drummer region, it will be the drummer editor. For pattern region, it will be the step sequencer. And for MIDI region, you will have the piano roll, score, and smart tempo editor. I mentioned before that there is no dedicated drummer track anymore in 10.8. This has to do with the default region type and the new rules regarding the software instrument tracks. Now we know that each software instrument track is set to one of the 3 default region types. However, this is not a restriction, only a convenience for the 3 steps I just explained: color code, default region creation, and default editor. The big change is that there are no restrictions anymore for the software instrument tracks and the external MIDI tracks regarding regions. You can create MIDI regions, pattern regions, and drummer regions. If you control-click on the track lane, you always see the 3 options to create any of those regions. To demonstrate the reason behind that, I created another diagram. We have the 3 region types with their corresponding color code: MIDI region, pattern region, and drummer region. The user interacts with the region via an editor. You use the piano roll or score editor, smart tempo editor, and also the event list to edit MIDI regions. They let you edit the individual notes and MIDI events. The editor for pattern regions is the step sequencer. Here you also edit individual MIDI events, but they are laid out on a grid, and you edit the individual cells that contain the individual MIDI events. The drummer editor lets you edit the drummer region with completely different user interface. Here you create play instructions and use other controls. But here is the important part. All these three region types have one thing in common, and that is they output MIDI data that is sent to the software instrument plugin on the software instrument channel strip that the software instrument track is assigned to. So the different editors for the different region types represent only the user interface to edit and display that MIDI data. At the end, all three region types just send their MIDI data to the software instrument plugin. And just two additional notes. Under this new default region type concept, there is no reason for a dedicated drummer track anymore. Now, when you create a new drummer track, it is just a software instrument track with its default region type set to drummer. This has two advantages. You can add pattern regions and MIDI regions on that track together with drummer regions. Also, each drummer regions on a track can now be set to a different drummer, although they play through the same software instrument plugin on that software instrument track. Click that padlock in the library to prevent loading a different plugin when switching drummers. An external MIDI track is assigned to an external MIDI channel strip, which is a channel strip that doesn't process any audio, just routes MIDI data, like an old-fashioned MIDI sequencer in the pre-DAW era. Those external MIDI tracks don't have a default region type parameter in the track inspector, but they also can now have MIDI, pattern, and drummer regions placed on their track lane. After this more in-depth look, let's go quickly through some other new features and changes in Logic Pro 10.8. First, a minor reorganization of the window tabs in the Settings and Project Settings window. The tabs in their control bar are more aligned with each other, following the same order from left to right for those tabs that are available in both windows. And the Format Display tab is now called the View tab, in case you wonder. While in the Settings window, let's go to the Recording pane to check out the Audio Recording section. When we click on the Bit Depth pop-up menu, we see a new option, 32-bit float. So yes, after 32-bit float support for freezing tracks, importing files, and exporting projects, you can choose 32-bit float in this pop-up menu to natively record audio files in your project in the 32-bit float file format. Let's stay in the Settings window and go to the View pane to select the General tab. At the bottom is a new pop-up menu labeled Display MIDI Data As. If you haven't noticed in previous versions, Logic Pro already supports the new MIDI 2.0 standard, with a corresponding checkbox in the MIDI channel settings to enable proper input and output between Logic and MIDI 2.0 devices. MIDI 2.0, among other improvements, provides a higher data resolution. For example, note velocity now has 16-bit resolution, continuous controllers, pitch bend, and aftertouch have 32-bit. Now this new Display MIDI Data As pop-up menu lets you choose to display the higher resolution as percentage or regular 7-bit number 0 to 127, but with a decimal for the higher resolution. Or you can leave it at the default MIDI 1.0 setting. That display setting affects how MIDI data values are shown in the following areas: Event List, Event Float, the velocity slider in the Piano Roll Editor Inspector, and the various help tags in the Piano Roll Editor and Score Editor. But keep in mind, although you can now edit MIDI values in higher resolution, you need MIDI 2.0 devices in the form of plugins or external MIDI devices to take advantage of that higher precision. There are a few more changes in the settings window regarding accessibility and tuning that I cover in my book. Next, let's have a look at the tool menu in the tracks area. At the bottom, you can see two new tools, the slip tool and the rotate tool. With the slip tool, you can drag along a region, but instead of moving the region on the timeline, the region remains at its position. As you can see, you move the content inside the region. This could be the audio data of an audio region or the MIDI events inside a MIDI region. The rotate tool, like the slip tool, also lets you drag left or right to move its content inside the region. However, there is one difference. If the content reaches the left or right border of the region, it will be moved around to the other end of the region and added there. Watch the icons of the tool that change to indicate the current action. Next, the loop browser that has a few welcome cosmetic changes. First, if you click the loop type button, it opens a dialog that lets you choose which loop types to display in the browser. There are two changes. Software instrument loops has been renamed to MIDI loops, and the icon next to the pattern loops checkbox has a violet color instead of the previous yellow color. And you can see that the loop icons for pattern loops in the loop browser are now also violet instead of yellow. The color yellow is now only used for drummer loops. There are a few minor changes in the mixer. The software instrument plugin button on a channel strip is now green instead of blue. This follows the overall color scheme that blue represents audio, like the audio effects plugins, and green represents MIDI, like the MIDI effects plugins, and now also the software instrument buttons. When you delete a channel strip in the mixer, you will be prompted with a new dialog. It gives you three options. Delete also the track that is assigned to the channel strip, or delete the assigned track only if it doesn't have any regions or cells on it. And the third option only deletes the channel strip but leaves the track in the tracks area. That track is then not assigned to any channel strip. By the way, with the dialog open, you can select the radio buttons using the up and down arrow to step through and then press the Enter key instead of clicking the OK button, or press the Escape key on your keyboard instead of clicking the Cancel button. If you open the pitch correction plugin in the mixer, you will notice a facelift for its user interface. Now it conforms to the look of the other blue plugin windows. There are two improvements for the Dolby Atmos implementation in Logic. If you're already mixing in Dolby Atmos, you know that any channel strip that is using the surround panel is called a bed track, routing its signal to the surround bed channel 1 to 10 of the Dolby Atmos plugin. This is indicated by the label surround on the output slot. Any channel strip using the 3D object panel is a so-called object track that routes a signal directly to an object input of the Dolby Atmos plugin. However, the output slots of those object track channel strips also showed surround in the previous Logic version, but not anymore. Those channel strips now show the label object on the output slots, so you can see on the output slot which channel strips are bed tracks and which ones are object tracks. You can find another Dolby Atmos improvements in the All Files browser. When you select the Browsers button in the upper right corner of the control bar and click the All Files button, you can select a project and import specific tracks and channel strips of that project into your current project. Now the All Files browser also supports Dolby Atmos projects, and you can import object tracks and bed tracks with all their corresponding settings, and the settings of the Dolby Atmos project, for example, the surround format. And last but not least, check out the two new plugins in 10.8 that I mentioned at the beginning, Sample Alchemy and Beat Breaker. Similar to the Quick Sampler plugin, that is a single audio file version of the full-fledged Sampler plugin, the Sample Alchemy plugin is based on the engine of the Alchemy plugin with just only a single audio file that you can drag into the plugin and process it. Beatbreaker is a multi-effect plugin listed in the multi-effects subfolder of the Audio Effects plugin menu. It provides a wide range of real-time effects, a great tool to get creative with an intuitive and fun-to-use interface. Okay, that sums it up about the Logic Pro Update version 10.8. For more detailed explanations of all the new features and changes in this new release, please check out my new book, Logic Pro: What's New in 10.8, with information and insights you won't find anywhere else. All the links are on my website, dingdingmusic.com. Don't forget to subscribe and check the bell for notifications about exciting new videos in this Music Tech Explained YouTube channel. In addition, you can read my free Logic and Pro Tools tutorials on my website. And please explore the books in my graphically enhanced manual series. They are available in different formats, as PDFs from my website, as iBooks on the Apple Bookstore, and Kindle and printed books on Amazon. All the links are available on my website, dingdingmusic.com.